This week's Torah portion, Parashat Emor, begins with a series of laws pertaining to the priests. This follows Parashat Kedoshim, which we read last week, with laws of holiness, which pertain to the pursuit of holiness in our ordinary lives, in every person's regular life, the many opportunities that we have to sanctify God, to sanctify each other, to sanctify relationships. And now the Torah turns to specifically to laws pertaining to priests about purity, about marriage, about the requirement of physical soundness and the absence of any blemishes or imperfections in the priests, a section that makes us a little uncomfortable, about sacred donations of food that people would bring to the temple that were allocated to the priests as their meals, as their food. And with regard to that section about donations that people bring, sacred donations that people bring to the temple, that then the priests and their families would partake, the Torah says the following: Adonai spoke to Moshe saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israel people and say to them, Ish ish mi beit Israel u'minager be'Israel asher yakriv korbano." When a person, any person of the house of Israel or of the strangers in Israel present an offering in the temple. And I was a little struck because I had not paid so much attention to this. And when I read this here, I said to myself, when a person, any person of the house of Israel or of the strangers in Israel present an offering in the temple, the strangers? Really? Were Gentiles allowed to bring offerings and sacrifice in the temple? And the answer is yes. It's quite surprising. An old rabbinic source, Midrash Halacha, in the book of Sifra, says, since it would have been sufficient in the verse to write a person, what is the meaning of the repetition? A person, any person, ish, ish, a person, any person. It serves to include the Gentiles who may bring offerings just like any Jew. And when we read in the book of Kings, a beautiful section, when King Solomon, dedicates the newly built temple, which he completed, and he turns in prayer to God. He says, "My God, turn to the prayer and the supplication of your servant and hear the cry and prayer that your servant offers before you this day. May your eyes, God, be open day and night toward this house, toward the place of which you have said, my name shall abide there. May you heed the prayers that your servant will offer towards this place. And when you hear the supplication of your servant and your people Israel toward this place, give heed in your heavenly abode, give heed and pardon." Or if a foreigner who is not of your people Israel comes from a distant land for your sake, for the sake of your name, for they shall hear about your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm, and thus comes to pray toward this house, O God, hear in your heavenly abode and grant all that the foreigner asks of you. Thus all the peoples of the earth will know your name and revere you, as does your people Israel. And they will recognize that your name is attached to this house that I have built. And this is echoed further in the book of Isaiah with a beautiful, glorious verse, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikare lekol ha'amim. For my house, says God, shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. This is the beautiful side of our tradition. The open, embracing, inclusive, generous spirit that is reflected also in the following ruling, also in an early rabbinic text, into Tosefta Gittin. In a city that contains Jews and Gentiles, the communal officials collect charitable funds from Jews and Gentiles for the sake of the ways of peace. So the Gentile poor are supported along with the Jewish poor for the sake of the ways of peace. Gentile dead are buried and mourned for the sake of the ways of peace. Gentile mourners are comforted for the sake of the ways of peace. Really the beautiful aspect, generous, open, inclusive spirit of our tradition, which makes us, I think, proud. And then we have the verse which we read in Parashat Kedoshim last week, Ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Adonai, Ani Adonai. And one might think that this is sort of a call for universal love. Love your fellow as yourself. Except, when I was copying this verse in my computer from Sefaria, I found the following. Love your fellow, in brackets, Israelite, as yourself. I am Adonai. And indeed, there are quite a number of commentaries that restrict the understanding of your fellow, Reacha, to one who is like you, to one who is of your people, who is of your tribe, who is of your ethnicity, who is of your group. And the commandment to love one's fellow, according to many sources, is restricted to Jews. Sometimes in the Torah, the word brother, neighbor, fellow is interpreted in a very restricted, less generous, and less universal way. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. And there is that aspect of our tradition as well. There is a verse in the book of Exodus, Parashat Mishpatim, that says that when a person's ox injures a neighbor's ox, and the ox dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price between the two. And they shall also divide the dead animal. And now, later on, the rabbinic tradition in the Mishnah, Bava Kama, says the following. If the ox of a Jew gores the ox of a Gentile, the Jew is exempt from liability. But if the ox of a Gentile gores the ox of a Jew, the Gentile pays the full cost of the damage. Nice. This is in the Talmud as well. Bava Kama 113b. It is permitted to retain the lost item of a Gentile, as Rav Chama Bar Guria, in the name of Rav, said. For where is it derived that it is permitted to retain the lost item of a Gentile? It is derived from the verse, with every lost thing of your brothers you have to return, of your brothers you have to return, indicating that it is only to your brother that you return a lost item, but you do not return a lost item to a Gentile. It makes us cringe. And rightly so. We feel this deep moral discomfort. But you know, the tradition itself is extremely uncomfortable with this. So much so that there's a following story in the Jerusalem Talmud. Shimon ben Shetach was in the flax business. His students said, Rabbi, allow us to ease your burden. Let us buy you a donkey, and you will not have to work so hard. They went and bought a donkey from a desert nomad, and the pearl was hanging on the donkey. They came to Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach, and they said to him, from now on, you have this donkey, you won't have to work so hard. When he learned about the pearl, he asked the students whether the seller the desert nomad, had known of it, of the pearl, at the time of the sale. They said no. He said to them, return it. They said, but why? Wasn't it ruled that although stealing from a Gentile is forbidden, one may keep the lost property of a Gentile? He said to them, do you think Shimon ben Shetach is a barbarian? Shimon ben Shetach would prepare to hear the word, blessed be the God of the Jews, than all the money in the world. Return it now. So this is the tradition itself, the rabbis themselves pushing against these more sort of restrictive, exclusivist laws that appeared in some part of our tradition. Another story. The sages taught the following story in the context of the law about the ox of a Jew that gores the ox of a Gentile and vice versa. The Roman kingdom once sent 2 officials to the sages of Israel and ordered them in the name of the king, teach us your Torah. The Roman officials read the Torah once, twice, and a third time. At the time of their departure, they said to the sages, we have gone carefully through your entire Torah, and it is true. It is correct, except for one matter. Why, they asked, are Jews exempt from paying damages they cause to Gentiles, while Gentiles have a maximum responsibility for any damage caused to Jewish property? In any case, we will not report this matter to our government. This is a story that is made by the rabbis themselves to indicate a profound moral discomfort with some of these laws that were decreed by some of their colleagues. There's a sharp internal critique in the tradition, and there's a tension. You can hear the tension within the tradition between the more open, generous, inclusive, and the more restrictive and less generous, let's say, voices of our tradition. In a wonderful essay called Human Rights and Membership Rights, Dr. Moshe Halbertal writes the following: the halachic voices that call for this sort of discrimination developed at a time when the Jewish community was a persecuted, afflicted minority within the empire of the Roman other, which dominated and oppressed it. When such voices enter the authoritative canon, however, they afford legitimacy to discrimination, even when the balance of power is reversed. Adopting the rhetoric of the weak in a position of strength is a serious distortion, an offensive tradition that Judaism and Zionism must combat with renewed force. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with particularism. As they say, membership has its privileges. There are obligations and rights that we have as members of a group. Any group has rights and responsibilities that connect the members of that group who are connected or bound by a covenant. There's nothing wrong with particularism. The question is, what's the limit of particularism? What are the limits of particularism? When particularism turns into a harsh exclusivism that then leads to discrimination and to racism, then it is morally wrong and unacceptable. And we hear this more now than ever, the hateful rhetoric, particularly in Israel, dominated in the government that is dominated by far-right nationalists, extremists, xenophobes, messianists. This rhetoric of hatred and disdain of the other, of the Gentile, Palestinians to begin with. And this hatred is contagious and it is spreading. The hatred of the non-Jew is becoming normalized in Israel and in many parts of our community here. more so after October 7th and after the war in Gaza, is becoming normalized. In a essay piece in the New York Times by Megan Stack, she says, Israel has hardened, and the signs of it are in plain view. Dehumanizing language and promises of annihilation from military and political leaders. Annihilation. We have to kill them all. Polls that found wide support for the policies that have wreaked devastation and starvation in Gaza. Selfies of Israeli soldiers printing proudly in bombed, crushed Palestinian neighborhoods. And this sits on years and years of the toleration, the propagation of the dehumanization of the other, of the non-Jew. And now it's becoming normalized. And here, in our own Jewish community, as Jews who love Israel, and with the increase in anti-Semitism and the polarization, you're either with us or against us. We are on the defensive, we are afraid, and so some in our own Jewish community find comfort in retrenching and closing themselves and locking themselves in and looking at the world around with suspicion, if not with disdain and hostility. You're either with us or against us, particularly when it comes to Israel. There's no middle ground. There's no nuance. There's no complexity. There's no possibility of any criticism. You're either with us or against us. And soon, then everybody turns into an anti-Semite. I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned of what this is doing to us Jews in the Jewish community, in terms of our relationship, our view of the other, our relationship of the other. God forbid that this type of hatred and dehumanization will become normalized further. There are two voices in our tradition. One that is open and generous and inclusive, and that seeks collaboration and partnership and dialogue and cooperation, and the other one that is the opposite. So who is the brother, our brother and sister, our neighbor, our fellow? Just us? Or does it include the other two? Which voice will become dominant? Shabbat Shalom.